Imagine waking up in a world where even the air cuts like a blade, the wind screams between mountains covered in ice, and every breath turns into crystals in the air. The cold isn't just discomfort. It's a living, hungry force that devours everything unprepared to face it. Now imagine standing there with soaking wet clothes. In the northern winters, a wet man was a dead man. Moisture froze within minutes. Fabric stiffened like stone, and the weight of snow could break an exhausted body. There were no dryers, no cozy fireplaces, and no time to wait for the sun. Yet the Vikings, hunters, fishermen, and warriors had to keep their clothes dry or die trying. So comes the question few dare to ask. How, amid ice storms and winds of minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 30 degrees Celsius, did the Vikings dry their clothes without letting them freeze solid? The answer reveals a brutal kind of genius, a fusion of natural science, survival instinct, and sheer willpower. They turned the cold into an ally. They used fire with precision, their bodies with strategy, and their very homes as living drying machines. In this video, you'll discover how Vikings dried their cloaks and furs in temperatures cold enough to make iron crack. Prepare yourself, because their secret wasn't comfort, it was endurance. It was survival where the ice never sleeps. The Nordic cold wasn't just winter weather. It was an enemy, a silent hunter waiting for its chance to strike. And for the Vikings, one mistake was enough. A misstep into a frozen river, a sudden snowstorm at sea, or a drenched cloak after battle, and the body began to freeze from the inside out. Wet clothing was a death sentence. The fabric grew heavy, warmth escaped, and within minutes the cold reached the bones. Drying anything in that world was nearly impossible. Inside a longhouse, the air was warm but thick with smoke and moisture. Outside, the wind turned every drop of water into solid ice, and yet they had to keep their garments ready, made of coarse wool, leather, or animal fur, because the cold never waited. Viking houses, as you've seen in other videos, were living engines of survival, long, low, and always built around a single heart of fire. But that fire couldn't burn too hot. There wasn't enough wood to waste, and too much heat could damage the turf roof. So how could they dry their clothes in such an environment? The answer lay in the house itself. Inside the longhouse, the fire burned constantly, releasing low, dense heat and thick smoke that rose and lingered between the beams. The Vikings learned to use that hot smoke to their advantage. Above the fire, between the darkened beams of wood, they hung their clothes on hemp ropes or birch poles. It was a slow and dangerous method. One wrong step, and the fabric could burst into flames. But they knew the exact line between heat and destruction. The garments stayed there for hours, hardening under smoke and dry warmth. The result, a darker, stiffer fabric, completely dry. That smoke didn't just pull out the moisture. It soaked the clothes with natural oils and resins from the fire, making them partially waterproof. It was like a curing process. The wool grew denser, the leather more resistant to water. Over time, the scent of smoke became part of life itself, a mark of survival. Whoever carried that smell was alive. But there wasn't always enough fire. On long journeys, or during nights when fuel ran low, the Vikings turned to another trick. They used their own bodies as furnaces of heat. Wet garments were wrapped in dry furs, then placed beneath their bodies as they slept. Layered between thick wool blankets, human warmth did the rest. Slow, damp, uncomfortable, but effective. A method born from both courage and desperation. While the snow howled outside, the house became a workshop of smoke and steam. Furs hung drying, cloaks hardened with ice, boots rested near the embers. Everything had its place, and every piece of fabric meant life. The sound of ice melting and dripping onto the stones was common in northern nights. The sound of clothing coming back to life. Drying clothes in the Viking Age wasn't a household chore. It was a ritual of survival, a silent act that separated the living from the dead. When night fell over the Norse villages, the wind roared like a living beast, clawing at every crack in the turf-covered houses. Inside, the darkness was broken only by the amber glow of the central fire, the beating heart of the longhouse. It was there that warmth was born, spread, and transformed into life itself. But that fire wasn't an ordinary flame. It burned slowly, almost as if it breathed with the house. The Vikings learned to tame fire as if it were a wild ally. Too strong, and it would burn the roof. Too weak, and it would leave their clothes damp, their bodies frozen, and the cold victorious. So they kept the flames low, fed with dry turf, aged dung, and strips of birch wood, fuels that produced more smoke than light. That smoke rose upward, filling the ceiling with soot and warmth, creating the perfect environment to dry clothes without destroying them. Above the fire, long wooden beams served as drying racks. On them, wool cloaks and animal hides were stretched out, fastened with small bone pegs or braided plant fibers. The smoke swirled around them in slow spirals, wrapping each garment in invisible warmth. Within hours, what had been soaked became dry and slightly stiff, protected by the very smoke that filled the air. The smell was strong, a mix of burnt fat, resin, and wet wool, but it was the smell of survival. This process had another unexpected gift. The smoke infused the fabric with natural compounds that repelled insects and mold. A well-smoked garment could last for months without rotting, even in damp weather. It was the ancient equivalent of a waterproof jacket, not crafted in workshops, but born beneath the breathing roof of a northern home. In the mornings, when the fire was rekindled, the inside of the longhouse looked like a temple of smoke and steam. Drops of water fell slowly from the clothes, hissing as they hit the embers. Women stirred the fabrics with sticks, turning them over, while men loosened the furs from their shoulders to dry the sweat from the previous day. Even the children knew that wet clothes meant danger, and the process was almost sacred. But not all garments could be hung. Boots and leather cloaks required a different kind of care. The Vikings used heated stones, carefully taken from the fire and wrapped in moss or animal skin, to dry the insides of boots and belts. These stones released gentle warmth for hours, evaporating moisture without burning the material. It was a simple, yet brilliant technique, turning the stored heat of the earth into a tool for survival. The longhouse was more than a shelter. It was a living thermal machine. Thick turf walls held heat the way a human body holds its breath. The warm air, trapped beneath the low roof, circulated slowly, feeding the drying cycle. And strangely enough, the very act of drying clothes helped heat the space. The vapor released into the air created a soft humidity that kept noses from bleeding in the dry cold. Amid the sound of the wind and the crackling embers, every hanging garment was a silent reminder. The Vikings didn't fight only with swords. They fought with intelligence. They learned that surviving the cold wasn't a matter of strength, but of harmony, with fire, with wood, and with the air they breathed. While the world outside turned into a white desert, the inside of the longhouse became a microcosm of warmth, smoke, and patience. Drying clothes there wasn't just a necessity, it was a ritual. Every movement, every breath, every gesture had a purpose, shaped by centuries of coexistence with the cold. Viking women, guardians of the home and the fire, mastered this silent art. They knew that living wool, spun straight from the sheep, still rich with lanolin, possessed an almost magical property. It resisted water and kept warmth even when damp. When a piece got wet, they twisted it gently, never breaking the fibers, and hung it near the fire, never directly above the flames. The right distance was measured by instinct. If the heat stung their skin, It was too close. If it felt warm and moist, it was perfect. Around the fire hung thick hemp ropes filled with cloaks, capes, and even woolen socks. The smell of smoke, mixed with that of hot wool and leather, creating an aroma everyone in the house recognized, the scent of a safe night. And when the wind grew stronger, the men stacked large stones around the fire. They absorbed the heat during the day, and at night, they were used to speed up the drying process. The wettest clothes were laid over these stones, covered with dry furs to trap the warmth. It was the closest thing to a dryer the medieval world had ever seen. But fire wasn't their only ally. The Vikings understood cold in a way few humans ever have. They knew that dry air, even freezing air, could pull moisture from fabric faster than intense heat. On days of harsh wind, they hung frozen garments outside, allowing the ice to vanish straight into the air without melting first. Today, we call that sublimation. They called it wisdom. As the fabric stiffened under the cutting wind, the cold turned moisture into crystals that slowly vanished. The result was a dry garment, cold to the touch but ready to wear. Many believed this process purified the clothes, a kind of invisible blessing given by the gods of winter themselves. And there was a spiritual side to it. Drying clothes wasn't just about preserving the body. It was about preserving the soul. The fire at the center of the house represented more than physical warmth. It was the link between the living and their ancestors. When garments hung above the smoke, it was believed they absorbed not only the heat, but also the strength of the household gods, invisible spirits who watched over the family. Women whispered small prayers as they turned the fabrics, asking that no one in the home grow cold during the night. The fire crackled, the smoke swirled, and the wind roared outside. It was a delicate balance between destruction and survival. If the fire grew too strong, the roof could burn. If the cold entered, the warmth vanished. And between those extremes, the Vikings lived, breathed, and turned necessity into tradition. In that bluish haze of smoke and soot, every dried piece of clothing was a victory, a small proof that man could challenge winter itself, not with brute strength, but with ingenuity. Because in the north, even the simple act of drying a cloak was a test of wisdom and faith. In the final hours of the night, when the wind calmed and the fire burned low, the inside of the longhouse became a warm, silent sanctuary. The hanging garments still steamed faintly, releasing their last drops of moisture as the smoke danced beneath the darkened ceiling. Outside, the cold howled in vain. Inside, life endured. The Vikings knew that conquering the cold didn't mean defeating it, but coexisting with it. The same smoke that made them cough also protected them. The heavy, dense air acted as an invisible shield against the white death outside. And when the first pale ray of sunlight pierced the narrow gap in the roof, it met clothes now dry, hardened by smoke and heat, ready for another day of work, hunting, or voyage. Each dried piece represented more than clothing. It was a symbol of survival. A smoked, rough tunic was a silent trophy of a night conquered. When men put on their wool cloaks again, now warm and stiff, they knew they had earned more than heat. They had challenged winter itself and won for one more dawn. The ritual of drying clothes became part of the Norse rhythm of life. Beside the runes, the offerings, and the battles, there was the household fire, small, persistent, and infinitely powerful. It was there that the fate of an entire family could change, because one wet garment, one mistake, could turn a body to stone and a name into memory. But there, beneath the earthen roof, the fire still breathed. The clothes hung like flags of resistance, the flames reflected in tired eyes, and the sound of the wind served only as a reminder that winter never slept, and neither could they. The Vikings learned that cold was not to be feared. It was to be understood, respected, and mastered. Drying clothes amid deadly frost was more than a task. It was a pact with the gods, a proof that man could turn the very air that sought to kill him into a tool for life. When the fire faded and the embers sank into silence, the air inside the house still carried the scent of smoke and burnt wool, the smell of victory over the ice. Outside, snow covered the world like a shroud of death. Inside, warmth endured. And so, night after night, generation after generation, the Vikings continued their war against the northern cold, not with swords, but with fire, smoke, and wisdom. Because for them, surviving winter wasn't an act of strength, it was an art.